students who have gone from state schools to the Ivy League, or vice versa. What was the most jarring difference? My wife did her undergrad at an Ivy and then to a pretty good state school for law school. Her answer: the amount of content you are expected to learn on your own outside of class. Lectures at her Ivy school were essentially in-depth extensions of the basic concepts the students were expected to grasp on their own from their reading. Those basic concepts are covered much more thoroughly at other schools. Here's a music student perspective. Undergrad at Peabody Conservatory, not Ivy League but a major music school. Masters at University of Kansas. Artist diploma. Postgraduate study, 2 years of full-time school, at Yale School of Music. Now I'm teaching percussion at Western Connecticut State University. I think the biggest difference between the state school, KU, and the Ivy League, Yale, from a strictly music school perspective, is the overall purpose exerted from the candidates. I heard some fantastic players at KU, but I didn't always get the sense that they knew what they were working towards, or why they were doing it. At Yale, almost everybody I worked with had this fantastic, almost juggernaut-like sense of determination. They weren't just learning their instrument, they were going to change the world with it. Looking back, I really think a lot of the players I went to KU with could have gone on to become really great musicians. I did notice that they didn't seem to take risks, or reach out to opportunities they might now grasp. A lot of them tended to play it safe, stick to what they knew they could get, and be satisfied with that. Now that I'm teaching to WestCon, I don't want to be a teacher who encourages their students to not take risks. It may not be possible for everyone to realize their dreams, but the drive created from the determination is a powerful force. Recruiters. Even if the academics are similar to lower rank schools, the prestige got my school recruiters and opportunities. This seems like it would be very key. It's difficult to make a resume stand out with a degree from the same decent sort of school that everyone else also went to. I did my bachelor's at a top 10 ranked private university in the US, and then my master's at a top 25 ranked state university that's known for engineering. To be honest, the biggest difference I saw was in an administrative sense. At the private university, they would hold your hand and make sure you met all your deadlines for declaring your major, selecting the courses you needed to graduate, and things like that. At the state university, you had to take care of that yourself for the most part, and if you missed something, they weren't as lenient. Also, parking enforcement was much stricter. As far as the coursework, it really depended on the professor in both cases. I had classes that ranged from awesome to mediocre at both universities, as well as from easy to dang near impossible. I feel like the quality of the students within their major of choice was maybe a little higher at the private university, but not by that much. What I did notice is that the students at the private university seemed to be more well-rounded. At the public tech school, you had a lot more engineers falling into the typical nerd stereotypes, video games, D&D, socially awkward and less appearance conscious, whereas people at the private university tended to branch out a little more. The downside of the private university is that 50% of my graduating class in engineering ended up in finance, consulting, medicine for example. People who saw biomedical engineering as pre-med plus, or other fields, not working as engineers. It's really disappointing to see the brightest minds of our generation getting sucked away by the vampire squids who see an engineering degree as nothing more than a shibboleth for being able to think analytically. Boo. I went to the University of New Hampshire for a year before transferring to a Penn. Biggest difference is by far the people. All of the differences in homework and course difficulty are because on average your peers are operating at a higher level at an Ivy League school. This means that people are more likely to have casual intellectual conversations, have academically geared hobbies, and overall have a greater appreciation for intellect. That's not to say that there aren't smart people at state schools, but on average the people at Ivies are smarter. They also are more driven, and partying acts more as a stress relief than a default activity. You'll see a student on a Tuesday pulling an all-nighter and then 2 days later being blackout drunk at a bar. The level of competition with those around you is insane because of this as well. People are generally friendly, but everyone is competing to get to the next level, whether it be grad school or the best jobs after graduation. You'll see a student on a Tuesday pulling an all-nighter and then 2 days later being blackout drunk at a bar. Can confirm this happens in just about every graduate school. Each offered me a chance to work insanely hard, and each was staffed with people who knew more than I did about the subject matter and were very anxious to help me learn. The most jarring difference was the tuition. Almost all of the Ivies offer 100% financial aid though, and many of them are no loan. Harvard, Princeton, and Penn come to mind. I pay less at an Ivy than I would have at any of my state schools. I took a couple classes at my local community college and they require, I'll just say bluntly, a lot less intellectual thought when it comes to assignments. There is a huge difference between average state schools and community colleges also. Not nearly as large as MIT, but still a very big difference. I transferred to an Ivy from Georgia Tech. Honestly, the material in the classes at Tech was just as difficult, sometimes more difficult. At my Ivy the competition is a lot more intense because there are more kids who are just basically geniuses. The professors are more impressive, and there are lots of Louis Vuitton purses floating around. Other than the price tag and how stupidly impressed most people are with the Ivy League label, there weren't too many differences. Although it's not like Tech is a community college or anything, it's a very good school. If you were in engineering, chances are Georgia Tech is just as good, if not better. The arrogance and the hand-holding. The grad students were so condescending when I told them I'd done undergrad at a state school. Oh, you went to Statu? Well, if you need any help, etc. The funny thing was my coursework was actually more challenging at the state school. At the private one, the professors went into painstaking detail about relatively simple concepts, and we spent days debating topics when we could have been covering something new. I swear I don't know anyone who made less than a B in most of my classes. The grade inflation was ridiculous. Whereas at Statu the professors covered lots of ground very quickly, and if you couldn't keep up, too bad. No pity B for you. Retake when you're ready. It's interesting that so many of the commenters here seem to have had the reverse experience. I definitely learned more at the state school. That's funny. I never saw that attitude about people from state schools. I think the attitude was, if you managed to get in from a lesser school, you must have really been a badass. The most jarring difference. People weren't as depressed and suicidal at the state school. I transferred out of the elite school because I couldn't deal with visiting another friend in the psych ward or going to another funeral. Binge drinking was more to numb the pain than for fun. So many people threatened to transfer, but for some reason I was the only one who did it. Never regretted it even though it meant giving up the elite degree. Then I went back to visit the next year, and literally almost got shot. So that was fun and reaffirming. State school, wider range of types of people, more relaxed, definitely easier classes, although some were still challenging. And most teachers at least kind of cared about teaching, as opposed to elite school where they couldn't give their last F and were very open about that. Way less competitive. Not Ivy, but went to a Seven Sisters for my freshman year of undergrad, almost immediately decided to transfer after. You know how most little girls always dream of having a pony? I never had to because I already had two. Teehee. A girl having a very public freak out because her mother wouldn't let her borrow the SUV, skip a week of school, and drive to Florida on her parents' dime. A classmate making a remark about how poorly dressed people make her weep for humanity. When I tried to use that as a segue to see if she would be interested in joining Amnesty International with me, her response, verbatim, was, "I don't weep for that kind of humanity." Transferred to state school, decidedly fewer buttholes. So I was a STEM major at a state school in flyover country and then went to big name law school. Undergrad was far and away more difficult, but I'm not sure how much of that was just the field of study or how much was the school itself. The most jarring thing was that at the state school all my friends actually managed to have a social life, difficult classes notwithstanding, whereas at law school I'm pretty certain half the student body never left the library. If I ever decide to quit being an attorney and go back to school, I'm not picking an Ivy, just personal opinion. No hate towards my East Coast friends. A. Quality of education matters less than recruiting opportunities. IMO. State school for undergrad, Ivy League for grad, and while they were mostly similar, there was certainly a subset of the student population at the Ivy that was the stereotype you would expect. Completely entitled, self-absorbed, and totally clueless about how the real world works. Luckily they were the minority, but there were enough to make you constantly aware of it. Oh, and of course what everyone else is saying, that tuition bill. Although not technically an Ivy, I received an undergrad from a state school and then got my master's at one of the little Ivies. To be honest, I noticed no marked change in the academics, teaching, or assignments. There was certainly nothing that would make me go, wow, that's $30,000 better. In my opinion, a college's value has more to do with your mindset and your effort than anything else. I've always believed that kids who party their butt off at a state school have about the same experience as those who do the same at an expensive private institution. Maybe at an Ivy the student body is more well off and the parties are better and fewer people have to work part-time jobs, but that was about it. I also don't agree with the assumption of the question that the difference has to be jarring. My opinion is that the recruiting opportunities are worth the extra $30K. Personally, coming from a big state school and currently in a PhD program at an Ivy League, the most shocking thing to me, the students here aren't really that much different than the ones from my old school. I thought everyone would be stuck up, with their rich parents and trust funds, but they are really just students who care a little more and party a little less, although the parties here are still good. I guess the real biggest difference is that everyone at the Ivy League almost knows that they have been set up for success by attending here, while the people in the state school know they have to fight a little harder for jobs after graduation. So there is a bit more nervousness and anxiety for the older undergraduates there. Best comment of the thread. State school to Ivy here. I made lifelong friends and had beautiful experiences at my state school. The Ivy League is filled with a disproportionate number of pretentious, sense of entitlement having C. I went to a community college, a relatively good one, then transferred into an Ivy. The best story I have there is that I started the first half of a year-long biology course at the Combe College, then finished the second half at the Ivy League. They even used the same exact textbook. The difference was astounding. In Combe College I just had to show up, memorize the terms at the end of each chapter and regurgitate them during exams. Like someone else on this thread said, it was taught to the lowest common denominator. But at the Ivy League, whoa, I had to deeply read the textbook and really understand it. We weren't tested on what we memorized. We were quizzed on what we brought to lab sections. And during big exams we had to really be able to connect disparate concepts and figure things out, like analysis, even in biology. Thank you for the excuse for a humble brag. I worked my butt off coming back to school later and I am really proud of it. The professors at the state school I went to were far more interested in my scholarly progress than the majority of the professors I had at the Ivy I went to. I didn't quite go state school to Ivy League, but I did go from a rank 90-100 state school to a top 15 ranked school for computer science, UCR to UCLA. No real profound differences, but the obvious. 1. Curves are so ridiculously easy at UCR compared to UCLA. I had a multivariable calc class at UCR that I went to once and did no homework, literally once. Crammed before the day of the test and pulled an A. I'm not a genius, and putting in one really hard day of studying was enough to beat curves at UCR. Left UCR with a 3.96. At UCLA, some classes I worked really hard in I got less than a B. 2. Student backgrounds were notably different. This could just be case specific for UCR UCLA, but most people from UCR came from low income backgrounds and went to public high schools. A great portion of UCLA came from wealthier families and went to private high schools. 3. Again, could be case specific, but UCLA students were way more involved in school and extracurriculars than UCR students. 4. TAs held your hand way more at UCR. 5. Career fair events. Ridiculous difference between the two schools. UCLA has every single great tech company you might want to work at from around the world. UCR had a handful of local companies. At UCLA, getting a job at Google, Facebook, Microsoft is pretty much the norm for good students. At UCR, it was pretty rare that anyone worked at the top tech companies like this. I knew 1 or 2 people at UCR that did, but they were definitely by far the exception. Went from a state school to a near Ivy. I'm new into it, but so far the differences are mostly in the peers and the grading. The peers. Smarter. Way smarter. You start to say something and then you think, what if I sound dumb, and you don't. The grading. They actually read it carefully and comment on it. No easy A's maybe, but they're watching. It's really, I can really feel the difference. People are saying it's just the tuition, but that's not true. It's challenging. You have to prove yourself, but you don't want to be one more person proving themselves. Everyone is cultured like you wouldn't believe. Been all over the world. The trivia night at the pub asks questions about operas and medieval saints and modal verbs. It's a whole new level. I spy another Chicago student. I really hope someone will see this comment since I am commenting so late, but I believe I have enough experience to adequately compare the undergraduate life at both a state school and in the Ivy League. After completing my freshman year at a state school, I transferred into the Ivy League, and I can safely say that it is the best decision I have ever made. The biggest difference, and in my opinion the best reason to attend the Ivy League, is the student body. At my state school, I would spend an overwhelming majority of my time hanging out with my friends, drinking, partying, and doing things that have provided me with great memories. But when I started to attend the Ivy League, I quickly found out that with the right attitude I can still do similar social activities and engage in discussions outside of the classroom that engage my thoughts, beliefs, and lessons. I wouldn't say that the friends I have made at the Ivy League are better, but rather different. I can still party and have a great time on the weekends, but by the same token, we can all discuss politics, current events, and campus controversies with ease, respect, and a mutual understanding that we have sufficient understanding of the topic to speak well on an issue. I do miss the state school atmosphere, the tailgating, laid-back student body, and relaxed atmosphere, but I think transferring to the Ivy League in the long run has provided me with the best opportunity to make the best version of myself. Ivy League student here who took a year off and took some classes at a very good state school. The main difference was the content of each class. Yes, both schools may use the same textbook, but at the Ivy League school, you were expected to know the basic principles of a lot more content before the lecture even began. We would cover a few chapters at each lecture, but usually the professor would add their own information to the lecture, which was supplemented by the textbook. Read about the different parts of the brain and memorize their basic functions. Then at lecture the professor would delve into neural networks, assuming that you can make the leap from memorization to application. Exams were intellectually challenging. We were not asked to recite dates, terms, or events, like at the state school. We were asked to analyze, compare and apply concepts and ideas. My time at the state school made me really appreciate my good memory because I never had to study. My good memory, while helpful, only got me a C on an exam at the Ivy League school, because if I didn't grasp the actual concept I couldn't answer the actual question. Went to a state school for undergrad, very good in my field, and a top school for grad school in physics engineering. This will get buried, but whatever. The biggest difference, both the students and the faculty at the top school tend to be far more condescending and arrogant. For example, my former supervisor, somewhat cited, and only marginally famous in my field, and probably sexist, told me that I had to meet his personal standards and the standards of the grad school. In and of itself would have been fine, except for the fact that he felt I didn't meet them. Well, that would have been okay too, except for the fact that he's full of crap. He should not been so condescending when I performed at the exact same level at my state school, and my supervisors there, members of the National Academy of Sciences, super famous and highly cited, thought I was really good and did a superb job. It's kind of garbage when subpar researchers don't think you are doing a good job, and the really top researchers think you are doing well. Created an account so I can answer this one. I went to a large, very popular state school for undergrad. I then did graduate school at Harvard. Within the walls of the two schools, there was basically no difference between the two. There were instructors who I thought were great, others not so much. I had classmates who I thought were brilliant, others who I thought were idiots. My friends at both schools partied equally as hard, and I feel like the education I received at both were at roughly the same level. But probably the main difference I noticed was the level of motivation of the students at Harvard. Back in undergrad I felt like one of the few who were constantly motivated to put in maximum effort when it came to school. At Harvard, everyone was like this. I went from top of the class to being just another straight A student, a dime a dozen at Harvard. While this may be discouraging to some, I actually saw it as a benefit, as being surrounded by such motivated people pushed you to work that much harder. Went to an Ivy and took a couple of classes from a state school. People were nerdier at the Ivy, which is something I prefer. I put a little bit of effort in classes at the state school and was top of the class. I put absolutely everything I had into certain classes at the Ivy and struggled to be better than average. State school to law school. Seeing students in the first couple of weeks of law school with Greek fraternity t-shirts. The shirts disappeared pretty quickly after that. Going from state school, U of Texas, to Ivy League law school, Harvard, was how weirdly insecure and complacent so people were. Then it hit me that pleasing authority figures must be a prevalent skill set for my classmates. For example, many people seemed abnormally terrified that they'd get a B, having never had a B their whole lives. I'd had 5 C's in college, so it scared me less. Of course, most people with 5 C's probably didn't get in, even after acing the LSAT. In college, I had read a novella named The Personal Success of First Lieutenant Peter Rosillo. The theme of the book was that soldiers who had been Ivy League students were more likely to commit war crimes than other soldiers, because they are simply more likely to do what they're told to do. The book made much more sense to me after my first year of law school. Very good book. The writer, Paul Woodruff, was a philosophy professor of mine who had received an air medal with valor in Vietnam, then returned to finish his PhD in Princeton only to be arrested at an anti-war protest. You'll have to list those among my conflicting accomplishments. He once quipped, "Fun fact, I got 2 C's in law school, still graduated with basic honors. CM Lord, mainly because I never ever got a B." True story. Other fun fact, Paul Woodruff gave me one of my college C's, then wrote me a stellar reference that helped get me into law school. Life can be funny sometimes. So, there are buttholes everywhere, but when you make something cost a lot, and attach a somewhat warranted but mostly unwarranted reputation to it, and spend half of your orientation beating it into kids' heads that they are better and in some way innately deserved this, you get a much higher concentration of our nation's worst, and a lot of people trying to be them, those awful people, as well. I felt as though it was a big scam. That's how I felt. That's how I feel. I can't think of a worse thing to do to the world than economically lock people out of the best education possible. Seriously, the top is a stagnant pond jerking off all over itself endlessly. It was socially a nightmare, and I spent the majority of my free time not around people from my school until I dropped out, mostly for these reasons. I knew and still remain close with a lot of awesome people, but I can't wait for the day education is free. It's going to be a huge freaking wake-up call for a lot of institutions that are really only exclusive in the sense that they cost a lot of money and have standards. I went to high school with a kid from one of the wealthiest families in the state, country even maybe. Kid couldn't have had higher than a 2.5 if that, never came to school and was generally that guy. He was accepted before I was, to the same school, to almost the same program. I wonder how that freaking happened. Seriously, the top is a stagnant pond jerking off all over itself endlessly. Welcome to academia. This is the biggest reason why I decided against continuing on to a PhD after finishing my master's. Well, it's not quite state Ivy, but I did my UG at University at Buffalo and now have gone to 2 different private graduate schools, University at Denver and then currently, Northeastern University. I would say the #1 difference I've noticed is that the student affairs and career services sector of the school is way more organized and motivated. At UB they literally were like, you get a job or some crap. IDK. They really could have given a crap. One time, I had to go get the secretary from down the hall after waiting over an hour so she could file some papers so I could finally get approved to write my honors thesis. I'm pretty sure at Noy that chick would have gotten fired in a heartbeat. Both of the private grad schools literally babysit in terms of career services. Currently at Noy I have 3 different career counselors. One guy just freaking writes my resume for me practically, and the other 2 are just there to look at internships, co-ops etc, and help me out in any way possible. At UB you'd be surprised if they remember to add you to the freaking list serve. I went to a flagship state school for undergrad as well. Career Services basically told me to just check their website. I did undergrad at an Ivy and am now getting my master's at one of the more highly regarded state schools. I have to say my coursework was far more rigorous in undergrad. The depth to which we were expected to understand and apply what we were learning was vastly greater than what I'm doing now. Even as a grad student, people can be pompous at the Ivies, but the same vibe exists at state schools except over different things. Went to a state school for undergrad, Ivy League for STEM PhD. Only main difference was the attitudes of the students. In undergrad, we had study groups and worked to understand stuff on our own. Didn't haunt professors' office hours. Only emailed for clarification when really necessary. Ivy League students IT'd got crap loads of hand holding, ridiculous curves on exams, and more office hours than they knew what to do with. Overall, the quality of their work didn't seem better. In lab, I mentored the laziest students, always finding ways to get out of doing PCR, half-assing experiments, sometimes ruining others' experiments, and they kept telling me that their school was better than mine. These lazy entitled suckers are MDs now. Don't get sick. Other than that, the schools and academics were remarkably similar. I'm highly doubting your story. I go to an Ivy League for grad school, and none of the undergrads I met would ever tell you to your face that your school was worse than theirs. At worst, they would just say nothing if you told them where you went. Also, they are obviously doing something right. If they're getting into good medical schools, their MCATs must have been decent. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.